I didn't know my marriage would fracture because of a couch. Not because of cheating, not because of money, not because of some secret affair, but because my husband couldn't tell his own brother to leave. My name is Ava Mitchell. I'm 26 years old. I've been married to Cooper Mitchell for 3 years. We worked 5 long, exhausting years to save for our first house, skipping vacations, cooking at home, taking overtime shifts, saying no to almost everything fun so we could say yes to stability. It was supposed to be the start of our real adult life. Instead, it became a crash pad for Cooper's younger brother. 6 months ago, at 2 in the morning, Mark Mitchell showed up at our door with 2 garbage bags and a sob story about being kicked out by his girlfriend. He was crying. He said he had nowhere else to go. We let him sleep on our couch. That was the first mistake. Within weeks, our living room stopped feeling like ours. His gaming console replaced our coffee table decor. Dirty plates appeared in corners. The smell of unwashed clothes lingered in the air. He slept until noon and stayed up until 3 a.m., shouting at video games while Cooper and I lay awake in our bedroom, staring at the ceiling. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself family helps family. I told myself I could endure it. But 6 months later, I came home to find beer cans on my kitchen counter, red wine soaking into our white bedroom carpet, and 3 strangers smoking inside the house we nearly killed ourselves to buy. That night, I told my husband something I never imagined I would say. Either your brother leaves, or I do. He thought I was bluffing. So I packed my bags. And when I walked out of my own house, I didn't know that leaving would expose a secret life his brother had been hiding, one that would finally force my husband to choose. I never wanted to be the woman who gave an ultimatum. But sometimes, protecting your marriage means being willing to lose it. Before Mark turned our living room into his personal landfill, before my marriage felt like it was being lived in the margins, Cooper and I were steady, not perfect, but solid in the quiet way that matters. I'm the kind of person who plans lists, calendars, labels on pantry jars, little rituals that keep my brain calm. I work full-time, I like clean counters, and I'm happiest when life feels predictable. Cooper is the opposite in some ways. Warm, easygoing, the type who can make friends at a gas station. He's generous to a fault, and when I met him, that softness felt like safety. We met when I was 22. I'd just started my first real job and was still pretending I knew what I was doing. Cooper was introduced through mutual friends at a small backyard gathering. String lights, cheap beer, music too loud. He made a dumb joke about the way I held my cup like I was afraid of it. I remember laughing, even though I didn't want to. And then he spent the rest of the night checking in on me like I mattered. When he proposed, it wasn't flashy. Just him, nervous hands, eyes a little wet, asking if I'd build a life with him. I said yes before he even finished. We didn't come from money. That was one of the first things we understood about each other. We saved for 5 years, literal years, tracking every expense like it was a mission. We ate leftovers until we hated them. We skipped trips, skipped upgrades, skipped cute little luxuries our friends seemed to buy without thinking. When we finally got the keys to the house, I cried on the bare living room floor because it felt like proof that we could do hard things and still win. And Cooper? He wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "We're home." That word mattered to me. Home. Cooper's family, though, they came with layers. His parents had moved to Florida the year before we bought the house, into a retirement community they'd been dreaming about forever. They weren't cruel people, but they had a habit of treating Cooper like the responsible one by default, the good son, the one who would always fix problems. And then there was Mark. Mark is 24 now, and if you've ever met someone who seems to float through life while the rest of the world pays the bills, you know exactly what I mean. He's charming when he wants something, funny in short doses, and allergic to responsibility. Cooper would talk about him like he was a hurricane you had to ride out. Mark's just going through a phase, he'd say. But phases don't last 6 years. Mark dropped out of college after 1 semester. He never held a job longer than 2 months. He lived with Cooper's parents until they moved, and from what Cooper told me, his parents leaving was partly a last-ditch attempt to force Mark to grow up. Mark also had a girlfriend, Jessica, on and off for 4 years. She had a 2-year-old daughter from before Mark. I didn't know Jessica well. I'd met her twice, once at a family barbecue where she looked tired but polite, and once briefly at a holiday gathering where Mark disappeared half the night and left her sitting alone with the kid. I noticed things early, little things. Mark borrowing money and never paying it back. Mark showing up late and making everything about him. Mark laughing when someone mentioned responsibility, like it was a joke adults told themselves to feel important. But Cooper always defended him. "He's my brother, Ava." And I'd nod because I loved Cooper, because I believed in loyalty, because I thought boundaries were something you only needed with strangers. I didn't understand yet that the hardest boundaries are the ones you have to set with family, especially the family your husband is trained to protect. By the time Mark showed up at our door at 2 a.m., Cooper didn't even hesitate. He opened it like he had been waiting, and Mark walked into our home like it already belonged to him. The first week, I told myself it was temporary. Mark slept on the couch with a blanket Cooper gave him. He looked small that first night, curled up, face red from crying. I even made him coffee the next morning. "Thanks, Ava," he said, giving me that boyish half smile. "Just until I get back on my feet." Back on his feet. Those words would echo for 6 months. By week 2, his 2 garbage bags had multiplied into piles. Shoes by the door, hoodies thrown over dining chairs, a controller permanently plugged into our TV. Our living room started looking less like a shared space and more like a dorm room after finals. He slept until noon. He microwaved leftovers at 1 a.m. He laughed loudly at his games, while Cooper and I lay awake in the dark. One night I whispered, "Can you ask him to use headphones?" Cooper sighed softly. "He's going through a lot." I turned toward the wall. Going through a lot didn't explain the dirty dishes under the couch cushions. It didn't explain the smell. It didn't explain why our grocery bill had nearly doubled. By the end of the first month, I stopped lighting candles for ambiance and started lighting them to mask body odor. I tried to talk to Cooper calmly. "I'm not saying kick him out tomorrow," I said, folding laundry too tightly, "but we need a timeline." Cooper rubbed his face. "He doesn't have anywhere else, Ava. Mom and Dad are in Florida. Jessica kicked him out." Something in his tone bothered me. Jessica kicked him out. It always sounded like he'd been exiled unfairly. 3 months in, I ran into Jessica at the grocery store. She looked exhausted. Not dramatic, not angry, just worn down. We ended up talking in the parking lot while her daughter napped in the back seat. And what she told me didn't match Mark's story at all. "He never paid rent," she said quietly. "Never helped with my daughter. I'd come home from double shifts and he'd be drunk. One night I found him passed out while she was running around alone." I felt my stomach twist. "That's why you asked him to leave?" She gave a small, humorless laugh. "I didn't ask, I told." Driving home, I realized something uncomfortable. Mark wasn't unlucky. He was enabled. When I told Cooper what Jessica said, his jaw tightened. "She's bitter," he said. "Breakups are messy." "But what if she's not wrong?" I asked gently. That's when the tension shifted. Cooper didn't yell. He didn't snap. He just closed off. "You don't know him like I do." The air in our bedroom felt heavier that night. After that, I started paying attention differently. Mark never filled out job applications. He never cleaned unless asked. He asked Cooper for money almost daily. Cigarettes, energy drinks, gas. And Cooper always gave it. "Just until he stabilizes," Cooper would say. But Mark didn't look unstable. He looked comfortable. He laughed easily. He ordered food delivery with money he didn't earn. He stayed up gaming with friends online, joking about free rent life. And then came the party. I walked in from work to music blasting, beer cans everywhere, strangers in my living room, and red wine soaking into our bedroom carpet. Our bedroom. That was the first time I felt something shift inside me. Not just frustration, but betrayal. Because this wasn't about Mark anymore. It was about my husband watching it happen and saying nothing. That night, while Cooper scrubbed wine out of the carpet instead of confronting his brother, I stood in the doorway and realized something terrifying. If I didn't draw a line, there wouldn't be one. The night of the party is burned into my memory in sharp, humiliating detail. I opened the front door and was hit with the smell first. Stale beer, cigarette smoke, something sweet and chemical underneath it. My heels stuck slightly to the floor as I stepped inside. Music blasted from our speakers. Not background music, party music. There were 3 guys I didn't recognize sitting in our living room. One of them was barefoot on our coffee table. Our coffee table. Beer cans rolled across the floor. Pizza boxes were stacked on the counter like a cardboard tower of shame. And somewhere down the hallway, I saw the faint smear of something red against white carpet. My heart dropped. I walked into our bedroom and saw it. A dark wine stain blooming across the carpet near the dresser. Our dresser. The one we assembled together on the floor when we first moved in. I stood there staring at it, and something inside my chest tightened so hard I had to grab the doorframe. Mark was passed out on the couch. I walked over and shook his shoulder. "Mark." Nothing. I shook harder. "Mark," he groaned, eyes half open. "What? What happened?" He blinked at me like I'd interrupted a nap in his own house. "Just some friends hanging out." I gestured toward the hallway. There's wine in our bedroom. He rolled his eyes. Accidents happen. I'll clean it later. Later. Everything with him was later. Cooper walked in about an hour after I did. I watched his face shift from confusion to anger to something softer, resignation. He didn't yell. He didn't confront Mark. He just started picking up trash. I followed him into the kitchen. "Why aren't you saying anything?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "I will," he muttered, stacking plates. "When? After he ruins something else?" He stopped moving. "It's not that simple, Ava." "It is that simple," I said, louder now. "This is our house." Mark stumbled into the kitchen at that exact moment, rubbing his face. "What's the big deal?" he said. "You guys are acting like I burned the place down." The dismissiveness in his voice felt like a slap. Cooper looked at him, jaw tight. "Don't throw parties here again," Cooper said flatly. That was it. No consequences, no deadline, no accountability. "Just a suggestion." Mark shrugged. "Relax. Relax." That word did something to me. I waited until his friends left and Mark disappeared back to the couch before I went into our bedroom and closed the door. Cooper came in a few minutes later. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at that stain. "We can't keep living like this," I said quietly. "He'll settle down," Cooper replied, exhausted. "It's been 6 months." He didn't respond. I turned to face him fully. "I don't feel at home anymore." That got his attention. He walked closer. "Of course you do." "No," I whispered. "I don't. I feel like a guest in my own house." The words hung between us. "You're overreacting," he said finally. "He's family. And I'm your wife." That silence felt heavier than anything else. I stood up. "I need you to hear me clearly," I said, my hands trembling, but my voice steady. "Mark needs to leave." Cooper's expression hardened. "You're asking me to throw my brother out on the street. I'm asking you to protect our marriage." He ran his hand through his hair. "He has nowhere to go." "That's not true," I said. "He just doesn't want to go anywhere that requires effort." The fight escalated slowly, not shouting, but sharp, each word more precise. "You're being heartless." "I'm being realistic." "You don't understand what he's going through." "And you don't understand what I'm going through." My chest hurt, not from anger, from heartbreak. "I can't keep living like this," I repeated. "So, here's where we are." He looked at me warily. "Either Mark leaves, or I do." The room went very still. He stared at me like I'd just spoken another language. "You wouldn't." My throat tightened, but I held his gaze. "I would." And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. He didn't believe me. He thought I was bluffing. The deadline came and went, just like every other promise. I gave Cooper until the end of the month. I didn't shout about it. I didn't remind him every day. I simply waited, watching, hoping he would finally choose us without being pushed. He kept saying, "I'll talk to him." He kept saying, "Give me a little more time." Time. Mark had already had 6 months of it. On the final evening of that month, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the calendar on the fridge. The square around that date was circled in faint blue ink. Not dramatically, not angrily, just quietly. Cooper came home from work like it was any other Tuesday. Mark was on the couch, gaming. Nothing had changed. That night, after Mark went out to clear his head, I stood in our bedroom folding clothes into a suitcase. Cooper walked in and froze. "What are you doing?" My hands didn't stop moving. "I told you what would happen." "Ava." His voice cracked slightly. "Don't do this." "I already did." He ran a hand over his face. "I talked to him." "When?" "Yesterday." "And?" "He just needs more time." That was it. That was the moment something inside me went quiet. Not explosive, not dramatic. Quiet. "I can't compete with your brother for basic respect," I said softly. "I shouldn't have to. You're forcing me to choose." "No," I replied. "Mark did that when he decided this house was his." He stepped closer. "You're being dramatic." That word again. My chest tightened. "Do you know what's dramatic?" I whispered. "Feeling like a stranger in your own home." I zipped the suitcase. The sound felt louder than our arguments ever had. He reached for my arm. "Where are you going?" "To my sister's." He looked stunned. "You're actually leaving?" "Yes." His voice shifted from frustration to panic. "I'll fix it, I promise." "You've promised before." I left that night. I didn't slam the door. I didn't scream. I just walked out of the house we'd built together, carrying half my life in 2 suitcases. Lisa opened the door before I even knocked twice. She looked at my bags and said nothing at first, just pulled me into a hug. And that's when I finally cried. Not because I wanted to leave, but because I hadn't wanted to. The first night at Lisa's, my phone rang constantly. "Cooper." I let it ring. Then came the texts. "Please come home. We can work this out. You don't have to do this." I stared at the ceiling and asked myself the question I'd been avoiding for months. Was I wrong? Was 6 months not generous enough? Was I heartless? Or was I the only one in this situation, acting like an adult? The next day, Cooper called again. This time I answered. I gave him 2 weeks, he said immediately. 2 weeks to find somewhere else. And if he doesn't, I'll handle it. You said that before. I mean it this time. His voice sounded tired, not angry, not defensive, just worn down. For the first time, I heard something different in him. Doubt. 3 days later, he called again. And this time his voice wasn't just tired, it was shaken. Ava, there's something weird going on. What do you mean? Mark's been secretive, taking phone calls outside, disappearing for hours. I closed my eyes. You think he's job hunting? Silence. No, Cooper admitted. That was the first crack. The first moment my husband started to see what I'd been seeing for months. But the truth we were about to uncover, it was bigger than laziness. It was bigger than freeloading. And it would finally force Cooper to stop defending his brother. 3 days after that call, my sister walked into her apartment with a look on her face that told me something had shifted. What? I asked immediately. Lisa dropped her purse onto the chair and crossed her arms. I saw Mark. My stomach tightened. Where? At the mall. With friends? She shook her head slowly. With Jessica. Everything inside me went still. And? I asked carefully. They looked happy, she said. Holding hands, sharing a pretzel. He had her daughter on his shoulders. For a second, I couldn't even process it. Because according to Cooper, Mark was heartbroken. Devastated. Too emotionally fragile to function. That was the justification for everything. I called Cooper immediately. That's impossible, he said. He was crying about her last week. Ask him, I replied calmly. That night, Cooper confronted Mark. Later, he called me back. He admitted it, Cooper said quietly. They'd been seeing each other again for over a month. Over a month. So while Cooper was defending him, while I was sleeping at my sister's, while our marriage was stretched thin, Mark had been secretly dating Jessica again. Why hasn't he moved back in with her? I asked. Cooper exhaled heavily, because she told him he has to get a job first. There it was. Mark didn't want to move back in with Jessica because that arrangement required effort. Our house didn't. Cooper sounded shaken. He's been lying to both of us. That sentence felt like vindication and heartbreak at the same time. For the first time, my husband wasn't defending his brother. He was questioning him. But even then, even after discovering Mark had been hiding a relationship, Cooper's instinct wasn't to remove him. It was to help him. I told him I'd help him write a resume, Cooper said. I closed my eyes. And what did he say? He laughed. Laughed. He said he's not working some dead-end job just to make Jessica happy. He said family should stick together. The irony almost made me dizzy. Family should stick together. Except when it comes to respecting your brother's marriage. Cooper went quiet for a moment. I think I've been wrong, he admitted. That admission changed something between us. But Mark wasn't done manipulating. Because the next day, I did something I hadn't planned to do. I called Jessica. I found her number through social media. My hands trembled before I pressed call. I didn't want drama. I wanted clarity. She answered cautiously. I explained everything. How long Mark had been living with us. The lies about being heartbroken. The ultimatum. The tension in my marriage. She was silent for a long time. Then she said something that made my chest go cold. He told me you two were pressuring him to get back together with me. What? I whispered. He said you were tired of him staying there and were trying to force him into a relationship he wasn't ready for. I felt my pulse in my throat. He's been telling me Cooper doesn't help him financially, she continued, that he's struggling to eat. My stomach dropped. Cooper had been giving him money almost daily. Jessica's voice trembled slightly. He's borrowed money from me too. For cigarettes, for gas, for emergencies. She'd been giving him cash out of guilt. And then came the worst part. He's been trying to convince me to let him move back in without a job, she said. He says expecting him to work is unreasonable because of his depression. Depression that somehow didn't stop him from gaming until 3 a.m., or throwing parties, or juggling 2 households for convenience. I thanked her for telling me the truth. When I hung up, I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not sadness. Clarity. Mark wasn't confused. He wasn't struggling. He wasn't lost. He was calculating. He was using sympathy as currency. I called Cooper and told him everything Jessica said. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a long silence. I've been enabling him, he said finally. Yes, but I didn't say it out loud. The next day, Cooper called his parents in Florida. He expected them to defend Mark. Instead, his mother surprised him. We've been waiting for you to stop rescuing him, she said. His father was even more direct. He's 24. If you keep softening the consequences, he'll never grow up. For the first time, Cooper had backing. Not just from me, from his parents. That night, he told Mark there would be one final ultimatum. 1 week, Cooper said. Get a job and start paying rent or you're out. Mark laughed. You don't have the guts, he said. He was wrong. But it would take one more explosive confrontation for Cooper to prove it. The confrontation happened the night I stopped hoping and started bracing. Cooper didn't yell. That's what made it worse. He walked into the living room, calm, deliberate, and started packing Mark's things into black garbage bags. At first, Mark laughed from the couch. "You're not serious." Cooper didn't answer. He just kept folding hoodies, wrapping cords, unplugging the gaming console. That's when the laughter stopped. "What are you doing?" Mark demanded, standing up. "I gave you a week," Cooper replied evenly. "You laughed." Mark's face shifted from confusion to anger. "You're choosing her over me." The words hit like a dart, designed to wound. Cooper's jaw tightened. "I'm choosing my marriage." I wasn't there physically, but Cooper told me every detail later. I could see it in my mind. Mark pacing, gesturing wildly, voice rising. "You're throwing your own brother out? Mom and Dad would be ashamed." "They already know," Cooper said. "I called them." That's when Mark panicked. He threatened to call the police. He accused Cooper of illegal eviction. But Cooper had done something I didn't even know about. 3 months earlier, after our first big argument, he'd made Mark sign a simple agreement stating he was a guest, not a tenant. Mark had signed it without reading. When Cooper mentioned that, Mark went pale. Cornered legally, he tried emotionally. He cried, "I have nowhere to go." Cooper offered to pay for a cheap motel for a week. Mark refused. It wasn't enough. Then, in a final attempt to regain control, Mark admitted something that revealed the full depth of his manipulation. He'd been staying with Jessica at night for weeks, sleeping in our house during the day, using ours as a daytime lounge, hers as a nighttime bed, getting the best of both worlds. No rent, no responsibility. Cooper told me that hearing that broke something in him. Not anger. Grief. He realized he hadn't just been helping his brother. He'd been played. Mark had 2 hours to pack and leave. And when he did, he made sure to hurt us on the way out. He tried taking Cooper's PlayStation, kitchen appliances, even a watch that belonged to Cooper's grandfather. Cooper had to threaten police involvement just to get the watch back. When he finally called me and said, "He's gone," I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty. 3 days later, I came home, and that's when I saw the damage. The couch cushions were slashed open, food smeared on the walls, some kind of liquid poured onto the carpet. It looked deliberate. It looked angry. I stood in the doorway of our living room and felt tears blur my vision. Not because of the money, but because this was our home. The one we built. The one we sacrificed for. And someone had vandalized it out of spite. Cooper stood beside me, shoulders heavy. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. For months, I had begged him to see what I saw. Now he did, and it hurt him. That night, we scrubbed walls together in silence. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't dramatic. It was just 2 tired people trying to restore something that had been damaged, both physically and emotionally. But even after Mark left, the chaos didn't. His friends started calling. Jessica called, furious because Mark had moved in with her permanently and refused to leave. He'd told her we kicked him out illegally. He'd told her we owed him money. He'd threatened her when she set boundaries. And that was when I realized something chilling. Mark wasn't just irresponsible. He was escalating. The dark part wasn't the mess. It wasn't the stolen appliances. It was the realization that someone who once sat on our couch, laughing with us, was now capable of vindictive harm. That night, lying in our bed, I stared at the ceiling again. But this time, it wasn't because of video game noise. It was because I finally understood something. You can love someone and still have to protect yourself from them. And we weren't done protecting ourselves yet, because Mark wasn't finished causing damage. The house was quiet again. Too quiet at first. No controller clicks at 2 a.m. No microwave humming in the middle of the night. No half-laughed excuses floating through the hallway. Just silence. And in that silence, Cooper and I had our first real conversation in months. Not about Mark. About us. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one that had once been buried under empty cans, and just looked at each other. "I should have listened to you sooner," Cooper said. There was no defensiveness in his voice this time, no justification, just regret. I wrapped my hands around a mug I wasn't drinking from. "I didn't want to be right," I replied. "I wanted us to be on the same side." He nodded slowly. I kept thinking if I just supported him enough, he'd change. I didn't realize I was choosing comfort over boundaries. That sentence mattered. Because this had never really been about Mark's laziness. It had been about Cooper's fear of confrontation. About the belief that being a good brother meant absorbing damage. And about my fear that being a good wife meant tolerating it. 2 days later, things escalated again. But this time, we didn't hesitate. Mark showed up at Cooper's workplace during lunch hour. He caused a scene in the lobby, demanding to speak to him. Cooper's boss had to call security. When Cooper told me, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "This isn't just immaturity anymore," I said quietly. "This is harassment." That night, Mark started calling our house repeatedly. When we didn't answer, the texts began. They started with guilt. Family doesn't do this to each other. Then they turned vicious. He called me manipulative, a witch, a homewrecker. He said I'd brainwashed Cooper. He threatened to show up at my workplace next. That was the moment something in Cooper snapped, not explosively, but decisively. "We're filing for a restraining order," he said. There was no hesitation. At the courthouse, we had to document everything. The party, the lies, the theft, the workplace incident, the threats. Reading it all back in chronological order felt surreal, like watching someone else's life unravel on paper. The judge granted a temporary restraining order. Mark was served the next week. His reaction was predictable, crying to their parents, claiming we were trying to ruin his life. But this time, something had shifted. Cooper's mother called, not to defend him, but to apologize. "I should have taken this more seriously," she admitted quietly. "I always made excuses for him because he was the youngest. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't tearful, it was just accountability. And accountability changes everything." The restraining order hearing came the following Monday. Mark didn't show up, which meant the order became permanent for the year by default. He was legally required to stay away from us, our home, and our workplaces. When we walked out of the courthouse, I expected to feel victorious. Instead, I felt steady, like something heavy had finally been set down. That night, Cooper sat on the couch, our new couch, and leaned his head back. "I miss who I thought my brother was," he admitted. I sat beside him. "I know." He turned toward me. "Thank you for not giving up on us." That's when I realized the true turning point hadn't been the restraining order. It had been the moment Cooper stopped seeing me as the problem and started seeing the pattern. Because boundaries aren't about punishment. They're about protection. And for the first time since Mark showed up at our door at 2 a.m., I felt protected. I thought the restraining order would be the final chapter. I was wrong. 3 days after it became permanent, Jessica called. Her voice sounded tired, but not confused anymore. Clear. "Mark was arrested," she said. For a second, I didn't respond. "Arrested for what?" "Shoplifting, at the grocery store where he worked. Briefly." "Worked briefly." Apparently, he'd managed to get hired somewhere for a few weeks. Long enough to pocket cash from the register and steal merchandise. She paused before continuing. "He called me from jail asking for bail." I closed my eyes. "And?" I said no. Her voice trembled slightly. "He admitted something to me." My heart began to pound slowly, heavily. "He's been stealing from you and Cooper, too." The room felt colder. "What?" "He said he took small amounts of cash from Cooper's wallet while he was living there. Sold some jewelry he thought you wouldn't notice, some small electronics." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I remembered the necklace my grandmother gave me, the one I thought I'd misplaced. I remembered Cooper saying his cash seemed to disappear faster than usual. We'd blamed ourselves. Forgetfulness, overspending, stress. It hadn't been either of us. It had been Mark. I thanked Jessica for telling me. After I hung up, I sat in silence. Not angry, not shocked, just done. When I told Cooper, he didn't explode. He just sat down heavily in the chair. "He stole from us," he said quietly. Not accusatory, not dramatic. Just a fact. "Yes," he nodded slowly. I kept thinking if I gave him enough grace, he'd eventually respect it. I reached across the table and took his hand. Grace without boundaries becomes permission. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I could see the weight lifting, even through the hurt. We chose not to press charges. We didn't have proof beyond Mark's admission to Jessica, and honestly, we wanted him out of our lives more than we wanted revenge. The restraining order was enough. His parents refused to bail him out. They refused to hire him a lawyer. For the first time in his life, Mark had no safety net. No couch. No sympathetic sibling. No girlfriend to manipulate. Just consequences. And consequences are loud when you've never heard them before. Over the next few weeks, something else shifted quietly. Family gatherings became peaceful. No walking on eggshells. No anticipating drama. No scanning the room to see what mood Mark was in. Cooper's mother stopped asking us to be the bigger people. Instead, she asked how we were doing. Tom, Cooper's older cousin, came over with his wife and kids one Sunday. We grilled in the backyard. The house smelled like food and fresh air instead of resentment. It felt normal. Cooper started seeing a counselor, not because I forced him, but because he wanted to understand why he'd felt responsible for managing everyone else's chaos. "I don't want to confuse loyalty with self-sacrifice again," he told me one night. I felt something warm and steady in my chest when he said that. As for Mark, he stayed in jail until his court date. Last we heard, he was facing charges and dealing with them alone. His parents made it clear they wouldn't intervene. Jessica ended things permanently. She told me she finally understood that helping him wasn't the same as loving him, And that sentence stayed with me. Helping isn't always loving. Sometimes loving someone means stepping back and letting them feel the consequences of their own behavior. The house feels like ours again now. We replaced the couch. We repainted the walls. We installed security cameras, not out of fear, but out of clarity. There are no garbage bags in the corner anymore. No strangers in the living room. No tension hovering in the air. Just quiet. And for the first time in months, that quiet feels earned. If you had told me a year ago that I would file a restraining order against my husband's brother, I would have laughed. I never wanted conflict. I never wanted ultimatums. I never wanted to walk out of my own house with a suitcase and a breaking heart. I just wanted peace. But here's what I learned. Peace without boundaries isn't peace, it's tolerance. And tolerance can quietly destroy a marriage. Cooper and I are different now. Not hardened, stronger. We talk more honestly. We check in when something feels off. We don't ignore red flags because they're wrapped in the word family. Our house feels like home again. Not because the furniture changed, but because the dynamic did. There's something sacred about protecting your space, about saying, this is ours, this is safe. I don't regret giving the ultimatum. I regret that it was necessary. But sometimes love isn't soft. Sometimes love says, I choose us. Mark's choices led him where he is. Our choices led us back to each other. And that's the difference. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone listening, it's this. You can be compassionate without being a doormat. You can love someone and still say no. And if someone repeatedly disrespects your home, your peace, or your marriage, that's not family loyalty. That's self-betrayal. We're not responsible for fixing other adults. We're responsible for protecting the life we build. And now, our doors are locked. Our boundaries are clear, and our marriage is finally ours again.